At 2:47 in the morning, a man walked into a small-town police station. Soaked from head to foot and placed a single brass key on the front desk. He didn't give his name. He didn't ask for help. He looked the officer on duty directly in the eyes and said only this: "Never open it." Then he walked back out into the storm. And he was never seen again. 12 years later, that key is still locked in an evidence drawer, and what it was never supposed to open is something no one saw coming. Stay with me for the next 20 minutes, because I promise you, this is not the story you think it is. I've changed certain names and details to protect the people still living through the aftermath of this case. But everything you're about to hear is built from real case files, real testimony, and one object that investigators still don't fully understand. This is the story of a key, a cold case, and a truth that took 12 years, one demolished building, and a single forgotten box to finally come to light. Let's go back to the beginning, to the night of the storm. It had been raining for 3 straight days in the town, we'll call it Millhaven, population just under 9,000. The kind of rain that floods the low roads and keeps most sensible people indoors. Officer Daniel Reyes was alone at the front desk that night, quiet shift. A couple of noise complaints, nothing more. Then, just before 3 in the morning, the station door opened and a man stepped inside. Reyes would later describe him this way in his report, mid-40s, maybe, soaked completely through, calm, like a man who'd just set down something heavy he'd been carrying for a very long time. The man didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't confess to a crime. He simply reached into his coat, pulled out an old brass key, heavier and larger than a typical house key, and placed it gently on the desk, almost like he was setting down something fragile. Then he said, "Hantes hentenskhet forvarde, never open it. For everyone's sake." Reyes asked him, "Open what? Who are you? What does this key belong to?" The man said nothing more. He turned, walked back out through the glass doors, and disappeared into the rain-soaked dark of Main Street. Reyes ran outside seconds later. No footsteps in the mud that made sense, no car pulling away. No one on the street in either direction. It was as if the storm itself had swallowed him whole. Now, before we go further, I want you to sit with that image for a moment. A man walks for who knows how long, in pouring rain, specifically to hand over a key to police and to warn them never to use it, not to report a crime, not to turn himself in, just a warning. What would make a person do that? Keep that question in your mind, because the answer, when it finally comes, is not what anyone expected, including the detectives who spent years chasing it. The case was assigned to Detective Marlene Okafor, a 14-year veteran of the Millhaven Police Department, known for her patience and her refusal to let unfinished cases sit quiet in a filing cabinet. Her first move was simple: identify the key. It was brass, old, possibly forged decades earlier, and unusually large for a standard door lock. Etched faintly near the base were 2 letters barely visible under normal light: AM. Okafor cross-referenced those initials against employee records, property owners, old town registries, even historical land deeds. Nothing matched cleanly. Next, she tried the obvious: match the key to a physical lock. Homes, storage units, bank, safety deposit boxes, old warehouses along the River District. Locksmiths across 3 counties were consulted. Every single lock in Millhaven was checked. None of them fit. Then came the security footage, or rather, the lack of it. The station's exterior camera had malfunctioned 2 days before the storm and hadn't yet been repaired. The nearest working camera 3 blocks away outside a gas station. showed only a blurred shape crossing the street around 2:40 a.m., too distorted by rain and distance to identify. No fingerprints on file matched the ones lifted from the key. No missing persons report from that week matched his description. It was, in Okafor's own words from her case notes, like chasing a man made of rain. 3 weeks against Arthur Mendel, a reclusive locksmith who had closed his shop and left town abruptly nearly 2 years earlier, A.M. Arthur Mendel. The initials matched. For a moment, it seemed the case might crack open. Okafor tracked down his last known address, spoke to former neighbors, even located a cousin 2 states away. But Arthur Mendel had been dead for 8 months, a documented, verified death from natural causes, long before that stormy night. He couldn't have been the man at the desk. The lead collapsed, and Okafor was back to nothing. Months passed, then half a year. The key sat in an evidence bag, catalogued, photographed, and eventually forgotten by almost everyone except one person after 8 months of dead ends. The case was formally reclassified as inactive insufficient evidence. No crime had technically been reported. No victim had come forward. Legally, there was nothing left to investigate. Most detectives would have let it go. Okafor didn't. She kept a personal copy of the case file at home. Not because procedure required it, because something about that man's voice, as Reyes had described it, stuck with her. Never open it. For everyone's sake, that wasn't the sentence of a criminal hiding evidence. It was the sentence of someone protecting something or someone. Okafor made one final request before the case went fully dormant, that the key itself never be destroyed, regardless of storage costs or department cleanup policy. It was granted, almost as an afterthought. That single request would matter more than anyone could have guessed. Years passed. Okafor was eventually promoted, then transferred to a regional office. New officers rotated through the department. The old case became a story junior officers heard about occasionally over coffee, the mystery key nobody could explain. And then, 12 years after that rainy night, something happened that no one, not Okafor, not Reyes, not anyone connected to the original case, could have predicted. The old Millhaven police station, built in the 1960s, was finally being decommissioned. A new headquarters had been constructed across town, and the outdated building was scheduled for demolition. Before the wrecking crews arrived, staff were assigned to clear out decades of accumulated records from the basement archive, boxes of old case files, evidence logs and forgotten storage bins that had been quietly gathering dust since before some of the officers on the cleanup crew were even born. It was during this process that a young records clerk named Priya Anand came across a small, unlabeled wooden box shoved into the back corner of a shelf behind stacks of unrelated paperwork. Rain briefly softens, then returns, slightly heavier, on the lid in faded handwriting. Were the words, "Do not open A.M." The same 2 initials. The same warning. Priya, who had heard the old story about the mystery key from a retiring sergeant just weeks earlier, immediately recognized the significance. She didn't open it. She called it in. Detective Okafor, now working 2 counties away, was contacted that same afternoon. She drove back to Millhaven immediately, 12 years almost to the week, since she'd first held that brass key in an evidence bag standing in that half-demolished basement. Under a flickering emergency light, she finally had both pieces in front of her, the key and the box it had waited 12 years to meet. But when they aligned the key against the box's lock, it didn't fit. The key had never been meant to open that box at all. The box wasn't locked with a key at all. It had a simple hasp, sealed only with an old, rusted padlock that snapped open with minimal force. Whoever left it clearly hadn't intended for the key to be the thing that opened it. The key wasn't a real key, it was a symbol. Inside the box was a single-sealed envelope yellowed with age and a folded letter. The envelope contained photographs, grainy, time-stamped nearly 2 decades before the night in the rain. The letter was signed with the same initials. A.M. Okafor read it in silence. Standing in that dust-filled basement, rain hammering faintly on the roof above her. The letter wasn't a confession to murder. It wasn't directions to hidden money or a buried body. As some had speculated over the years in hushed department rumors, it was something far more human. 19 years before the storm, a man named Elias Whitfield had been convicted of arson in a fire that killed a local shop owner. A fire investigators at the time ruled deliberate, based largely on the eyewitness account of a young man who claimed he saw Whitfield near the building minutes before the blaze. That eyewitness's initials were A.M. He had been 22 years old at the time, frightened, pressured during a long interrogation, and, in his own later words from the letter, certain of something I was never truly certain of at all. Of the following years, that witness carried the weight of a testimony he slowly came to doubt. He moved away. He changed his name more than once. He built and quietly dismantled a life defined by guilt. The photographs in the envelope were something he'd secretly kept for nearly 2 decades, images taken the night of the fire, showing a different figure near the building's entrance, a person who was never properly investigated because the case against Whitfield had seemed, at the time, so airtight. He hadn't come forward sooner out of fear of prosecution for withholding evidence, fear of retaliation, fear of unraveling a case that had already destroyed one man's life and might destroy his own. But he couldn't destroy the photographs either. So he did something in between. He hid them, left a symbolic key as a kind of unconscious confession, and warned police never to open what he wasn't yet brave enough to let them see until, in his own words in the letter, "The right person is finally free to see it when I can no longer stop it." Okafor moved quickly. The photographs, combined with modern forensic reanalysis of the original fire scene techniques that hadn't existed 19 years earlier, supported exactly what the letter described. Elias Whitfield, who had served 11 years in prison before his release on parole and had spent the years since trying, unsuccessfully, to clear his name, finally had his case reopened. 8 months after that basement discovery, Whitfield's conviction was formally vacated. He was 61 years old. He had lost his marriage, his business, and most of the years he might have spent differently. But for the first time in nearly 2 decades, his name no longer carried the word arsonist beside it. And the man who walked into that station 12 years ago, soaked through and vanished into the storm, he was never identified, no name in the letter beyond initials. No trace found, despite a renewed search once the full story came to light. Some believe he passed away in the years between the storm and the discovery of the box, perhaps even before Priya Anand ever found it. Others believe he's still out there somewhere, having finally let go of a truth he carried for 19 years, choosing anonymity over recognition. Detective Okafor, now retired, said in her final statement on the case, he didn't want credit. He didn't want forgiveness, I think he just wanted it to be over, on his own terms, in his own time. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones we're afraid to open. They're the ones we're afraid to leave closed forever, for 19 years. One man carried a truth heavy enough to reshape another person's entire life, and it took Aka that opened nothing at all to finally set it free. If you've made it this far into the story, I want to know what you would have done in his place. Would you have come forward sooner, or do you understand why he waited? Tell me in the comments below.